Let's just do one thorough question. Bitcoin scaling drama, what's your position?
Okay, so scaling is actually not as hard of a problem as you think it is. So there's two types of scaling. There's scaling of data and there's scaling of transactions, okay? So the vanity metric that everybody looks at is, what is my TPS? So Bitcoin's 7, and PayPal's this, and Visa's this, and so forth. And people love to brag and say, I'm at 10,000 transactions per second, or something like that. Like Elastico is a great example, or Bitcoin NG, or any of these things that can potentially improve your scaling. So it's like usually a sharding scheme where you say, I'm going to process different transactions on different threads, and then we have some way of putting them back together. And that's fine, and it's great. But the big thing is the blockchain itself needs to be partitioned. And what do I mean by that? Well, right now we live in a replicated world where when I put a byte of data into the blockchain, that is replicated by n full nodes. It is not a sustainable system. You are creating the most competitive, sacred database in the world. And if you're going to end up being used for many applications like auditing checkpoints and voting and other things, and these things have to be committed to the blockchain, it will necessarily grow to petabytes in size. Not because you want it to, but because the system has to grow to that point to meet the need. What does that mean? It means that the only person who can have it is a very small group of people who have gigantic hard drives, right? So you need to be able to break it up and say, Bob, you get a chunk, and Alice, you get a chunk, and there's some erasure code we put on top. And when we chop it all up, there's a way of putting it all back together with some availability guarantee. So I think that the sharding debate and the partitioning debate is what's underlying scalability. And we have to have a philosophical discussion in Bitcoin about what we want to be. If we want to be a settlement layer for large amounts of value that are mostly a unit of account, then it's perfectly okay to have a low TPS rate, and it's perfectly okay to have a very expensive database. Because basically you're just this settlements layer for industry, and all your real cool stuff is going to be an overlay protocol, like the Lightning Network, or if sidechains works, then some sidechain where all this magic happens, okay? But if you want the underlying network to be like really cool and really fast and have a high TPS rate, you have to both be able to shard the transaction space, and you have to be able to partition the blockchain and have strong availability guarantees. Now, what's the state of the art? We can shard the state space. That's easy. A lot of people have figured out how to do it. There's plenty of good papers. The blockchain partition, probably going to be not too hard to do, but you won't have the same level of security and availability that you currently have in a replicated model. So it's a game of trade-offs. So that's that with that. Now, in particular, the block size debate, I wrote an article when Mike Hearn left the space. I think it was a year and a half ago, right when scaling Bitcoin was occurring. And my opinion was adopt segregated witness because it's a decent idea, fixes transaction malleability, and it's useful for other things. Okay. And also increase the block size to 2 megabytes. Then go ahead and create an organic growth metric based on 2 factors. One is the rate at which disk space tends to increase over time. And 2 is the rate at which network capacity tends to increase over time. Okay, we go from 56K modems to DSL to cable, and we tend to get more bandwidth over time. And similarly, we go from 100 megabyte hard drive to a gigabyte hard drive to a 100 gigabyte hard drive. Now we're in the terabytes and so forth. There is a way to model that. So why don't you model those things and create a mathematical metric like we have with difficulty retargeting or the monetary policy, that over time, after so many blocks, we organically increase the block size. Then you never have to have the conversation again, because you know that you're always going to be growing on par with technology. And you're always going to get that real 2 megabyte value at that time. And so I think that's a much more elegant way of solving the block size debate in particular. Then you need to pivot the conversation to the underlying philosophy of the ledger, whether it's going to be a slow unit of account, a slow store of value that's used for large settlement, or if it's going to be this fast-paced, super competitive system that's sharded and has high TPS and everything's done on chain. There's camps in both directions, and they need to fight it out, and eventually the community needs to reach consensus. And by the way, they have no right to be the world reserve currency and no right to claim that they're going to replace fiat if they can't reach consensus. I'm sorry, you can't come to me and tell me your system's better if you can't make decisions in your system. Only when you found a way to get people who disagree to find a way to agree can you say your system is better, or else my system is better, because I can at least get people to agree. Might not be optimal, but we can move forward when we have to and when we have to make changes.